Well, New York Giant fans, we have a win. The New York Giants won against the Indianapolis Colts on Sunday by a score of 45-33. As a Giants fan, that's the most I've seen them score ever, actually, because I was not really much of a fan, nor do I remember watching the game against the New Orleans Saints back in 2015 back in 2015 with Drew Brees and Eli Manning, where they had that shootout. It was like 52-49 the final score. But I will disclaimer this. Not only is this podcast going to be big picture, it's going to be some fan-integrated stuff. So if you're excited about the win and you're looking for actual analysis, I don't know that this is going to be your type of flavor for an episode. I'm going to say that. I think first thoughts, and we're going to go into a couple of different segments here. Again, big picture mostly, is John Mara's probably happy that the Giants did not go 0-9 at home, which, that I guess hip hip hooray, 50 some odd degree weather. I don't think it was that sunny in MetLife Stadium on Sunday. Maybe I'm wrong, but people showed up to the stadium and people wanted to win. I'm going to get this out of the way. I mean, we'll talk about it extensively. As I said, this is going to be a lot of fan stuff, and then we'll try to take it into a real outside the look portion. If you guys haven't been keeping track with me, and if you guys didn't see the stream on Sunday night, which was the wrap-up of the year, R0B, a couple other guys came on. Love it. We had a real fun time, so please check that out. I was rooting for losses. I've been rooting for losses, I want to say probably since the Eagle game. Since after the Eagle game, because we had that game, that I think the Steelers, and then we had Washington, and then we had the Panther game, which we all lost, and then it just kept happening. So I'm like, okay, we'll see how far this goes. And then the Giants, for some reason, put up a 45 burger against the Indianapolis Colts. Now, the Colts defense is not like so bad. Their run defense is horrible, but for some reason the Giants were not successful in that light, but they were successful in the passing game. Which, I mean, the secondary's been decent. It's a bend but don't break defense, but the Colts defense just collapsed in the first half, and the Giants also had points in the second half as well. Also add 7 off of a kick return touchdown, which, my moral of the story, aside from losing the number 1 overall pick, is where in the hell was this all season? You could, even if I'm not talking draft position and the Giants, per se, had their quarterback or something along the lines, right? Let's just say, I don't know, they drafted a quarterback and he got injured, and now you're just dealing with a backup of some sorts. And, the fuck draft position, but they're finishing out the season, whatever. The song remains the same. Where the fuck was this all season? I mean, special teams slightly better than Thomas McGahee's scheme last year. But Amir Smith-Marset, he, Jersey native, runs the opening kickoff of the second half all the way back. Matt Gay didn't really make an effort to tackle, which, to be honest with you, I don't blame him, because you really don't want your kicker getting injured. I'm just surprised at the execution by the Indianapolis Colts. I don't think they had a lead all day. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think the Giants ever played from behind in this game, which I think would be the first time all season, I think. If we go to the play-by-play, yeah, well, it's okay. So they did play down 3-0 at one point, but I mean, it wasn't anything like the Seahawks game or the Browns game. I guess there was an eventuality that the Giants would win. But still, like the question remains the same, the song remains the same. Where the fuck was this all season? Amir Smith-Marset, he just runs through the middle and he gets a touchdown. Drew Lock, I mean, to anyone, that's the most surprising element of the day. I mean, to be fair, in most cases, I would say about 3 of the 4 passing touchdowns were predicated. No, 2 of the 4, so half the touchdowns were predicated on Malik Neighbors getting yards after the catch. And great for him, right? He's got some 1,000 yards. I don't know if he'll get Pro Bowl selected. I don't think he will. But with shitty quarterback play, I mean, he's managed to put up 1,000. And I don't think he's had a touchdown since Tim Boyle. And then before that, it was a long streak. So I'm happy for him. You know, you're happy for the young players. Had a 59-yard touchdown, and then he had another touchdown, which was yak. And then Wan'Dale Robinson had a touchdown. He had a nice day, 71 yards. Slayton had a 32-yard touchdown. So there's that. And then Tyrone Tracy, Mannertz, and Singletary also got in the bunch. I'm surprised Daniel Bellinger didn't get in the bunch because we were talking about him on the preview show with Derek Larger and how they really don't cover tight ends that well. But the Giants on defense did manage to allow 2 over 100-yard receivers in Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce, who seemed to be dominating the day for Indianapolis. I mean, the rushing game was noticeable for Indy. 125 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3.9 yards per carry for Jonathan Taylor, but he was a little dinged up. Pierce, 20.3 yards per reception, which he's been all over the explosive plays all season. And then Michael Pittman Jr. was also factoring in 1 touchdown, 9 catches, 109 yards. So, you could choose to still take the negative side on this because, however you feel about this win, Joe Flacco still threw for, he had 2 interceptions. He had 1 stupid one at the end. He had the Dane Belton interception, which Dane Belton is always good for. And he still passed 2 touchdowns, 330, 8.7 on a supposedly decent passing defense. And Deonte Banks did not look good. I think he had 2 or 3 different penalties. So, again, you take your positives, you take your negatives, do whatever you like, but that's not an encouraging sign. Most of what, you saw today, kind of not sustainable, right? And that's the issue here. Is not just, where the hell was this all season? It's what is not sustainable. I don't think the Giants, if they had maybe 4 games to play, or they had something to play for in the near future, I don't think that the Colts are missing that many tackles ever again. I don't think another team is doing that. I think that was just a one-off stupid performance, and Colts fans are probably irate, as they should be, because they were playing for a playoff spot. Denver was a team that they had to battle with. They lost, but Miami's in it now. At least they're still fighting for a playoff spot. They, need the win against the Jets, but the Colts are pretty much done for. Which, again, sad. And their defense giving up a 45-burger to a backup quarterback, sad. But, for instance, Drew Lock is never going to throw for 309 yards ever again in his NFL career. He probably put up the best quarterback statistics and performance since Eli Manning. Now, you could say Daniel Jones. I don't want to say him against the Colts because he had rushing stats too. He had, I think, 2 rushing touchdowns. But, I mean, if you want to go Jones, you could go 2019 against the Redskins at the time. And then before that, you had Eli Manning against the Saints where he had 5 touchdowns and all that shit. Then again, too, he may have had 3 or 4 against the Eagles in 2016. Then again, too, he also turned it over once or twice, which around that time Eli Manning was good for. So Drew Lock is not throwing for 309 yards again. Wan'Dale Robinson, okay, you could see that. Neighbors, you could see, well, he obviously, it's stuff that we already know that is, some transferable to next year and some not transferable to next year. one of my biggest problems, and this is where the fan talk comes in. So again, if you're disgusted with the fan talk, feel free to unplug. Is this shit does not carry over. Like, I will say this before we talk about the number one pick and all these other different things. I think it is a big, absolutely big. I'm going to write this down so I know what I'm talking about. It is a big misconception that shit transfers over to the next year. This is a year-to-year league. Now, shit is obviously not going to transfer over in some light, because I believe that the New York Giants will fire Brian Daboll at the end of the season and that they will keep Joe Schoen. Hopefully that's not the case. Hopefully both of them go. But, like, for instance, if the Giants were to do something along the lines of recency bias and they were to bring back Drew Lock and say, Drew Lock, you're our bridge quarterback. We're going to bring in either, some competition, keep Tommy D, or we're going to go out, we're going to draft a developmental quarterback, not a first or second round quarterback, which second round is developmental too. So we're either going to draft a developmental quarterback or we're going to draft a guy in the second round, like a Jackson Dart or a Dylan Gabriel or a Quinn Ewers, and you are going to start the season, right? Now, the only reason the Giants would do this is because Joe Schoen would be the GM. I wouldn't see a new regime picking up Drew Lock and, saying, hey, we're going to re-sign you. Now, in the circumstance that they would re-sign Drew Lock, I don't think the Giants would sign him for $5 million. I think they'd sign him for less, considering, A, the way he's played, and, $5 million to Drew Lock is reprehensible. Meanwhile, Jameis Winston, he got something along the lines of $1 million as a backup, and I would argue Jameis Winston had a good few games, despite the interceptions. So just keep that in mind. That's not carrying over, right? So I just want to put it out there as the misconception, because some fans believe shit carries over to the next year. I happen to believe that, I think John Mara could believe that too, especially if they win against Philly. I think there's going to be a big misconception in that front office if they're stupid enough to say, okay, well, we got these 2 wins and better coaching, maybe, I don't know. Like, I think there's a better chance that Daboll was not, and I hate conspiracy theories and tinfoil hat and fan fiction about the Giants. I really hate talking about it because it's really not real life. But you know what has a better chance of having occurred already than this traveling over to next year is Brian Daboll. And I will not say that the Giants tanked. I don't see that at all. They just played the results because Daniel Jones was bad. They released him. They humiliated him. They did what they did, and that's that, right? So obviously they started Tommy D. Tim Boyle got some time, and Drew Lock obviously after the bye week. I just thought that they were that bad, but one thing I could grab onto rather than, this is going to translate to next year, is Daboll getting super pissed at the potential outcome of him getting fired, which I think he knows, and saying, you know what? I'm going to fuck you guys up into thinking this is sustainable, and I'm going to fuck you guys up in the draft. So we're going to go out and I'm going to create this awesome playbook, and we're going to win this game. Now, I don't know if his play calling, strategically on the film, was like that exciting, because, maybe Malik Neighbors doesn't break away for those 2 touchdowns. If he gets tackled, we might be talking a different story here, because that's 2 touchdowns off the board. So minus 14 points, that's 31. And the Giants would still be, competitive and stuff like that in the game. They would have lost, but I'm not going to play this if, ands, or buts game. I don't know. I don't know about you guys. I find it really weird that we show up here in week 17 against the Colts, show up and put 45 up when you're on the inch of going 0-9 at home and losing 11 straight games. That's when you show up. Not when, the team needs you back weeks ago. Not when, okay, maybe you still could have fought for a playoff spot or, you could have won games or something like that. Which is like another indictment on the front office. Because at the end of the day, Drew Lock was brought in at $5 million to be the backup quarterback, right? We saw that. And he did not get first-team reps at all with Daniel Jones, who was having not a great camp. Now, mind you, Drew Lock did not have a good camp either. But Daniel Jones got no competition, right? Tommy DeVito, he was decent, right? He didn't get first-team reps. Drew Lock didn't get first-team reps. It was Daniel Jones or bust. And flawed concept all through the bells for the preseason. So, again, I know some things are a one-off. They don't happen a lot. But my question is this. I think maybe half of that performance that we saw on Sunday telling us that Drew Lock was better than Daniel Jones? Like, again, as I said before, sometimes things have, one-offs happening. They don't happen again. It's just like an anomaly. But I could understand if, okay, Drew Lock, the Giants put up something like 25, 28 points. Understandable. And again, this is not like the worst defense in the league. This is a bad defense, but it's not the worst defense in the league. But Drew Lock puts up 4 touchdowns, 309 yards, which is probably the best stats in his life, if we're being honest. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe he had a good game in Denver or two. Maybe he had a good game in Seattle. But nothing compares to this. So, even if you're, again, I'm going to be mentioning this back and forth. Even if you're not concerned about draft position, this is a big fuck you to the fans because there's more questions than answers, right? Where was this all season? Is Drew Lock a better quarterback than Daniel Jones? Why wasn't Daniel Jones pulled earlier? Could Drew Lock have done something when, Andrew Thomas was still playing and this was still a functional O-line? And Drew Lock didn't even get sacked, which is interesting. I mean, they only allowed one quarterback hit, and that was coming from Kwity Paye. So the O-line played up to the occasion, and they had 3 guys out. They had Runyon, they had Van Roten switched to center for Schmitz, and they had, obviously Van Roten was put out of his spot, so you had Aaron Stinney. So you had a couple transitions. But again, my main question, which angers me more than ever, is why was this not even like a centimeter? Why even a centimeter of this performance? Where was it all season? When fans were showing up to the stadium, when the fans were doing this, where was this when the Giants needed to win week 1 against the Vikings? Where was this when the Giants needed to win against the Washington team, right? The Commanders, if you will. Where was this when the Giants could have went 3-3 against the Bengals? And the Bengals don't have a great defense. They're probably the team that the Colts are. But where? Where was this? Again, reflecting on the moral L, is the Giants happen to play best when nobody is watching them. And not that they're under the radar, but the Giants play best when shit doesn't matter anymore. We saw last year, Tommy DeVito win 3 games, and then they win the game against the Eagles, right? I mean, you saw them win a few games in 2018 with Pat Shurmur. 2020 I really won't talk about because that was just weird. But we've seen this continuing nonsense. And this is what bad teams do. Now, let me do something here, and we're going to actually talk about this loss of the first overall pick, which, again, fan theory, so feel free to unplug if you don't want to hear this. But let's get into it. The Giants had the first overall pick. They weren't locked, but they had the first overall pick for the game, before the game. And they had a couple of contenders because, this team's 3-12, this team's 3-12, this team's 3-12. Okay, whatever. That happens. They do their thing. And then the Giants go out and win this game, which, again, fans didn't want. Fans at the stadium obviously were not rooting for losses. But I didn't want it. A number of Giant fans on content creation, social media didn't want it. And here's the thing, right? I'm going to make two things known, two statements, which are true, right? First of all, people come out and say NFL teams don't tank. I call bullshit on that. The Giants don't tank. That's a statement. Teams across the league, like we saw in 2020, the Eagles pulled, I think at the time it was Carson Wentz and or Jalen Hurts. Don't remember clearly. And then they put in Nate Sudfeld, and the Giants were not a playoff team. They, just said, okay, we're going to put in Nate Sudfeld, and the game's over. Now, I don't know why they did that. They probably wanted to screw us over, whatever the fucking reason was. I don't really care at this point because it's not like it hugely set us back. I mean, Joe Judge is no longer here. His effect on the franchise is limited, if anything. So, the outright theory that teams don't tank, I think is pretty flawed. We saw what happened with the Dolphins in 2019. Stephen Ross was fined. They gave up over 100 points in the first two games. Now, granted, they did win 6 games. I think 5 or 6 games. Somehow enough to be in that same top 5, top 10 range to get to a Tagovailoa, the tank for Tua campaign. Now, I don't know if the Dolphins were following that, but they were fined for tanking. See where this is going here? The Giants will never tank. As much of a disappointment of a statement that is, the Giants will not tank ever. Ever. Do not throw in my face that the Giants tanked this season. No. You're giving them a compliment if you say that. You know why you're giving them a compliment? Because you're saying they're not as bad as we think they are. They're just putting on an act. Let's be real. John Mara is known to be old school, but also emotional. Do you think in the New York market, he's going to let Joe Shane, Brian Dable, or anyone running the team from day-to-day operations tell him or make some sneaky move under him and say, we're going to look to tank and get the quarterback for next year? Now, again, people have floated theories. I don't think any of them are true. Because I don't think John Mara, in the years that I've been a Giants fan and I've read John Mara and, the way he's done things, he doesn't want empty seats. He doesn't want all these banners flying all over the stadium and the planes. And he doesn't want signs being brought in. He doesn't want the paper bags. He wants people in seats. He wants positive headlines. And that's not far off from what all owners want. Right? Obviously, there's some questionable decision-making on his part in the last few years. But I will say this again. The New York Giants will never tank. So it's not a shot at those who say, well, I wanted them to lose and blah, blah, blah. That's not a shot at those people because I'm one of those. It's a shot at the people that say, they're tanking. Oh, they're tanking. And, they're not this bad. I think they are. Because, you could talk about the pieces like Malik Neighbors, Tyrone Tracy, Wan'Dale Robinson, if you want to consider him a piece. But there's so many underperforming cats on this roster, even before they went on IR. There's so many underperforming cats that Joe Shane has brought in, and it's a gross dereliction of duty. So that's why I consider the Giants not a team that would be tanking, right? I don't think the Giants were tanking in 2017 when Ben McAdoo was fired. He lost the locker room. That's not tanking. That's your team giving up on you. Now, I don't know if this team has given up on Brian Dable. I personally am in the middle because, where were they against Tampa Bay? Where were they in some of these other games? Meanwhile, they show up against the Saints. They obviously beat the Colts. They got pissed on by the fucking Falcons. So it's a matter of when this team wants to show up or not. They're not tanking. Professional athletes will not tank. That is a guarantee. However things want to go. Jermaine Eliminor, I know he has said something, and a lot of people said a couple other different things, whatever. Professional athletes will not tank. It's just factual, but the Giants will never tank, as we saw last year as well. They saw Tommy DeVito's little streak. After the bye week, they had a decision to make. They said, okay, it's Tyrod or Tommy, and they said, well, it's Tommy because he's been winning the last few games. He's bringing people in the seats because of the hand purse movements and all that shit. So, as a result, you had Tommy, and then when his time wore out, you had Tyrod Taylor. But in a big length discussion to seriously talk about the inner depths of losing this first overall pick, here's the draft order. You have New England, you have Tennessee, you have Cleveland, you have the Giants, you have Jacksonville, Carolina, the Jets, and Vegas. And Chicago. So the Giants, the first four teams have 3 wins. You have the next 5 teams in the order with 4 wins. So if the Giants manage to win the game against the Philadelphia Eagles, right, I think the farthest back they could go, pending strength of schedule, I'm not really so much in tune with the strength of schedule. The farthest they could go back is probably 7, 8, 9. Now again, that's not factoring strength of schedule. And obviously it'd be so much different once week 18 is over because strength of schedule I don't think matters at that point because you're just looking at the team that you played. That team that you played probably doesn't resonate with draft order. There's probably a couple of different intangibles. But let's look at the first 4 and maybe even go down the list as we just did. New England does not need a quarterback. I don't know if they're going to have a different head coach. I don't think they will. I think Gerard Mayo will get another year and they'll do their thing. Right? I think that they're doing one of two things at number 1. And I know this is already draft talk in December, but look where we are. This is where the Giants have been the last 12 fucking years. So I think they take Travis Hunter, who probably is the best player in this draft outside of Austin Gentry that's not a quarterback. And, of course, you have your Tyler Warrens, your Abdul Carters, all these other different guys that are in there. So they probably take Travis Hunter. I'm not talking about trades because we're going to talk about that in a second. Number 2 overall, I sincerely believe that Tennessee is going to take a quarterback more than Cleveland because Will Levis is not Callahan's guy. Callahan benched him. Both quarterbacks, him and Rudolph, are going to play in Week 18 against the Texans. But I think it's a little ridiculous if they don't take a quarterback. Because, again, Callahan, the Titans, have been so bad. You could trade out of that, but I just think it's an ideal opportunity to get a quarterback. And even if they don't get Shador, they get Cam Ward. So it's 1 or 2 here. And the Giants would have to root for, a couple, well, not the Giants, but us Giant fans would have to root for a couple of different scenarios, which I'll talk about in a second, right? So I'm going to write that down so I do not forget. Cleveland, I don't know what they're going to do. Personally, I think there are a couple of different pieces, away. I think the quarterback is going to be one of the biggest talking points. I don't know that Kevin Stefanski wants to draft his own guy. I like him as a coach. I don't think he's 3-13, 3-14 bad, but Deshaun Watson sucks. DTR, 6 interceptions all season. Jameis Winston can only do limited amounts of things.
and a couple of other tiny issues. So realistically, I mean, they have to make a decision. They have a ready-made defense, it seems. Again, I could be wrong. So do they trade back and just add a couple of assets and say, okay, we're gonna win. We're gonna do the win now scenario. We will run it back with Watson, or we'll sign Kirk Cousins, or we'll sign Russell Wilson, which obviously, at this point wouldn't be a bad idea. I don't know what the scenario is over in Pittsburgh, or, I mean, this would take a lot of money. They could sign Sam Darnold because Darnold, well, originally was actually projected to go to Cleveland in the 2018 draft. So they are the wild card of the draft order between 1 and 4. And you have the Giants, who need quarterback at 4. So here is my scary, scary thoughts, right? Is people have this notion of a theory that just because the Giants didn't, obviously didn't trade up for Drake May last year, but you remember how I said about things carrying over? People have this preconceived notion that Elliott Wolf is going to trade with Joe Schoen because last year he didn't because they needed a quarterback, but now he's going to trade with him. I don't know where that evidence is coming from. That's a bullshit statement. My opinion is a bullshit opinion. Because, again, things can change. They could sit at 1. And again, I don't see Tennessee trading out. They could, right? They realistically could. And, I wouldn't say it's favorable. It's a favorable opinion or a favorable decision. But they could. I mean, it's less likely. So I think New England or Cleveland trades out. This is, of course, if it shifts over into the next week and none of these teams win in pretty much the same draft order. But let's see. The Giants, again, need quarterback. So what if people and their opinions are wrong and New England either sticks, which would be fine, right? I guess they take Travis Hunter. That's number 1. Number 2 is they get a really good call. What if the New York Jets call them? What if the Las Vegas Raiders call them? What if the New Orleans Saints call them? See the pattern here? You guys see the pattern? Now, I don't know if it's as much of a threat as it has been in years past. But if we're talking about 2 teams that could jump up to 1, as of this draft order, I think it's the Giants and it's Vegas. And here is the thing, right? Elliott Wolf knows that if this is Joe Schoen, this may be a different GM. But let's just say it's Joe Schoen. He will have rights to take his balls away from him. He will have those rights because he knows last year they didn't pick the quarterback. Last year they didn't trade with them because New England wanted to pick the quarterback. So now all the leverage goes to New England and the Giants have to give up a tooth, another gold tooth, an arm, an eyeball, a leg, and their dignity, if they have any, to go up to New England's spot at 1 and pick Shedeur Sanders. Or Cam Ward, whatever quarterback they like. And the Giants, more so with Shane than any GM, that would be a gross dereliction to duty. Now, I'm not saying trading up is bad. I'm not saying that. But the Giants have put themselves in a position to where Joe Schoen not picking the quarterback in this past draft, argue Penix or Nix or whatever, and New England is the team that you wanted to trade with. And they need pieces. They're not a quarterback away or a wide receiver corner away. They are a few pieces away. So they are going to take everything they can from the Giants. Meanwhile, in aisle B, in East Rutherford, Joe Schoen will be as desperate as possible because guess what? Let me throw you guys a bone. And don't think this won't happen, because it could. Let's just say the New York Football Giants, right? Let's say they pick a developmental QB in this draft. Someone who's a project. Jackson Dart, whatever, any of those guys in the second, third round. Or they go on later and pick a guy, and they just roll with a bridge. And the roster is still not good enough to where, the team is, I don't know, let's say between 3 and 6 wins, right? And you notice that the roster is bad, but not having a franchise quarterback shows lack of direction. Because realistically, if you get a developmental quarterback and you sign a bridge, you still should be able to win games, right? This is not, you're not going to go out and tell the fans, this is developmental. You remember, the Giants don't tank. So you should be expected to win 7 to 10 games. Because what John Mara would be selling us by bringing back Joe Shane is, the quarterback was bad and the coach was bad. So what are you going to do? Fire the coach in year 1? No. You're going to do what the Jets did. The Jets, after the 2019 draft, right? Mike McCagnon was fired, and Adam Gase got to pick his own GM and Joe Douglas, and obviously the rest of the Jets front office. So you're telling me that if the Giants don't learn from this mistake, right? They don't learn from this mistake of, keep one, not the other, and this, that, and the third, that they're not going to go out here, do something completely ridiculous if Joe Shane doesn't get a quarterback, or the roster's not good enough, or the Giants are bad enough in 2025 that his job is safe. No. Because he's 4 years in, and the roster is not good enough, and all those different things. There's no sign of a direction. So I think John Mara would fire Joe Shane, and then they would let the head coach pick the GM. Which, unless it's Mike Vrabel, who's, I would say, a decent talent evaluator, or you let a rookie head coach pick a GM, it's still, the optics are still bad. So, most likely case scenario is, if this is the draft order that the Giants stay with, they will have a desperate Joe Shane, and he will have to lug all the goods and the assets, throw them on the table, and toss them to New England. And again, that doesn't help him either if you do get a franchise quarterback, because, Joe Shane would be staying for another regime. Yes, in year 1, definitely. Year 2, that's not even like a conversation yet, because you got to see how year 1 goes. Because a smart person, I'm not calling John Mara stupid, but I'm just saying someone could recognize, who's in the football operation, and say, let's see. You didn't build up a good roster in 3 years beforehand, but the roster is going to suck again in 2025 because you traded up for a quarterback you were desperate for, and you didn't have the pieces to surround yourself with through the draft, and you didn't trade guys at the deadline. You didn't get rid of Ojulari. You didn't get rid of Slayton. You let them walk. You didn't trade Okereke. You didn't trade Thibodeau. You didn't trade some of these guys. And now you have a limited draft class with a new head coach coming in, and it's going to be glum. You guys see what I'm saying here? So, I know teams don't tank. I know that. Right? Some team, actually no. Let's draw it back a little bit. The Giants don't tank. I know that. But you know what? There's so much more than, you got to get the quarterback. People's jobs are on the line. Joe Shane, if he comes back, is going to be a desperate man. And guess what, folks? I don't know if New England's going to fire their coach. I don't think Stefanski's leaving. I don't think Callahan's leaving. But what marketing are you doing to head coaches out there if you don't have the first overall pick? Right? Because you can't predict how the draft is going to go. You could say, okay, the draft is going to go this way. It goes a completely different way. You bring in a Mike Vrabel, for instance, or you bring in another rookie head coach like Liam Cohn. You bring in a Todd Monken, a Ben Johnson, which is kind of a pipe dream. And you have two scenarios at hand. And you can't work through those scenarios. You have to go by what the draft goes with. And the problem with that is the draft is after free agency. This is not the NBA. So you have to make up a plan in February, March. Are you going to go full throttle and say, okay, we're going to get another backup quarterback, but we're going to definitely 110% draft a quarterback, no matter what? We like all these guys, which isn't necessarily a great way of doing things, but it could happen. Or you could say, I don't know that I like this class, or I don't know that the quarterbacks that we like in Ward and Shador are going to be there at 4. So we're going to sign a veteran like a Russell Wilson. We're going to run it back with this team and hope to win. Or you could go on another scenario and say, okay, we're going to trade back for assets, which I would hate, to be honest with you. Or you could be really incompetent and say, okay, we're going to play the results. We're going to sign a veteran. We're going to play the results. We really like Shador or Cam. I think a lot of teams see that too, of course. So in that case, they won't do anything. They'll be stuck with their pants down when Tennessee picks their quarterback. And in this scenario, of course, someone trades up with New England or somebody trades up with Cleveland. And the Giants will have their pants down. That's the worst case scenario. But as you can see, these different scenarios aren't great either. Which is why, again, this is more than just, it's draft position. It's people's jobs on the line. And why Joe Schoen should not be here next year. Because it just creates more incompetence. He hasn't put up a body of work that's worth respecting. And my final remark before we end the show is this. Who the hell is going to want to come here and want to work with Joe Schoen, knowing what he's done to the Giants and knowing how arrogant he was on Hard Knocks? Like, comment, subscribe. Turn on post notifications so you know when the live stream pops or a video drops. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. This is the last episode of 2024, so obviously we made it to 2,000 subscribers in June, but appreciate you guys so much for, tuning in, and obviously during these dead times. I hate talking about this stuff. Like, I don't want to talk draft. I don't want to talk about fan theories, but this is where we're at. This is why the New York Giants have been garbage for the past few years. Anyway, I appreciate you guys so much. Hope you guys have a happy new year, and we'll see you in 2025.